Two obviously really good opponents on the road this week, and guys have the day off today. We'll get to work tomorrow on cleanup from last game, and then moving forward to a full week ahead of us on the road.
One of the things that Tom said last night, he was just talking about roster construction in general, and you touched on this a little bit on your radio show, but he said that we're all still feeling, or at least coaches are still feeling, like the effects of COVID and how that has impacted building rosters and building teams. How do you think we're getting closer to that being in the past? Like, how much is what happened with COVID and then the subsequent decisions about that? How much is that still impacting the game?
I mean, I think it makes rosters older. The ones that choose to either keep players for an extra COVID year or take a player who has an extra COVID year. I think it generally makes rosters in today's game older than what they normally would be. I think we're the outlier in the sense that while we've seen that impact with Justice, we probably haven't seen it. I guess with Sean as well. We haven't seen it maybe to the degree in terms of the consistency on the roster. But I think it generally makes rosters older. And, I think roster construction is something that we obviously need to really look hard at, and ways in which we can maybe continue to learn things in just today's ever-changing climate. And, those are more probably things you're processing right now, but more also, off-season, thoughts.
When you say that it makes rosters older, is it a different kind of older, though? Because you're not always dealing with guys. You might be dealing with fifth, sixth-year guys, but they're not fifth, sixth-year guys from your program. What challenge does that add?
Yeah, I think when you have that's maybe where the advantage can lie. Now, in some cases, you want that young man to move on because you feel like, hey, there needs to be room for a younger player who maybe is going to be a sophomore to grow. So there's those real decisions as well. Maybe it's mutually beneficial for both parties to move on. But I think the one, Tyson Walker's one where I think he mentions the value of having that extra COVID year. He's your starting point guard. He also is a transfer who has an extra year, and I think they've seen the benefit of that with just him staying in the program, and it's benefited him and it's benefited their team. You look at Penn State starting point guard who's an all-conference, probably first-team all-league player. He's really benefited from, having an extra COVID year. So there's certainly examples of that.
Coach, on the radio, you were talking a little bit about Zed's physical toughness versus mental toughness, and I was just wondering when I heard that, in what ways maybe the latter has manifested this season in terms of hard times he's had.
Just ability to play through. He's an emotional player. So the ability to play through, he's got a heavier load on him now than he ever has. So ability to play through disappointment and play in the moment with a better response to struggling play as a team or struggling play individually. He gets caught up in the moment because he's an emotional player. He has not always handled it with the kind of resiliency that he needs to have, and he's got to continue to grow in that area. Could be a bad officiating call, could be just a moment where he missed an open look, whatever the case may be. That's, I think, where he has to just really grow mentally.
And then I know you said with his shoulder that, you guys will evaluate that in terms of like if it needs surgery and whatnot after the season, but I'm just wondering, because you said that, does that mean that like there's not a significant risk of him like really, re-injuring that like for the rest of the season in a manner that it would require surgery before the end of the season, I guess?
Well, I don't want to speak out of turn because I don't know if I'm as versed as I need to be in the specifics of that. But I think what we feel like it can we can manage it through the season right now, unless, the brace really does protect it, unless there's something more significant. Even if there was something more significant, I don't know that it would require immediate surgery, but it could mean that he has to miss another game.
When we spoke to Chris Collins last week, he said that from his experience, it gets harder and harder to get back up and compete when you haven't experienced the joy of winning in a long time. He said the weight training, the nutrition, the film prep, everything you do, it gets harder for the guys to get back up and do it again when they haven't won in a while.
Yep.
Is that harder for coaches too?
Sure. Sure. I mean, I think it is, it's just, it's a dark time when you are struggling. And, I think you have to be able to approach each day with the optimism that, hey, we're going to grow and get better. And, I was in the office very early on Sunday morning just prepping for our group with excitement about what was coming. And I think that's the approach that's required. And, yeah, it certainly can be challenging. You feel these things in a way that just it's hard to understand. You eat differently, you sleep differently, you just live differently when when you lose a game. So it's certainly the case, and I think we have to be mindful of that with our players, because there are some things that we can look at and say, okay, hey, let's just improve here for longer stretches, and we'll see the dividends.
And then with this stretch, correct me if I'm wrong, but other than the Indiana game, it seems like every game you've had a point where you're either winning by a few or you're down by 3 or 4, where you could stop and say, listen, if we get a stop here in a bucket, this is a tie game. And it seems like through this stretch, in almost every point where you hit that, you can't get the stop, and then you go back down by 6 or 7. Do you think that's like a tangible, we struggle on defense with A or B, or is it more of like a resiliency, toughness thing when you get to that spot?
I think it's both. I think it's both. I think it is a resiliency and toughness thing, and I think I would add poor offensive possessions to what has stunted our ability to get it to a one-possession game or take the lead or get it from 8 to 6. We've had too many poor offensive possessions, too many poor shots, sometimes shots in crowds, and then you combine that with at times not being able to get. But we got enough stops against Wisconsin. They're late. We had enough stops in last night's game for the bulk of the game. It was more our offensive possessions were not good. Sometimes if you miss shots and you have a good offensive possession, you can live with that, but I just think there have been too many times in those stretches when we're trying to answer the bell where we just need to have better ones.
Chris, you mentioned losing yourself within a game, needing guys to kind of lose themselves within the competition to contribute in different ways other than scoring. For first-year players, is that especially hard to do, and do you see it more commonly in your experience that like second-year and third-year players are able to do that more, or is it not maybe a matter of experience?
Yeah, it depends on the player. I mean, players that have always been, two-way guys or have been guys, that have always impacted, Kyle Young impacted the game in a lot of different ways, so he was never really consumed with the scoring. So it just depends on the player, but certainly, Dwayne had to really grow from being a scorer to figuring out he could rebound and assist and defend and still impact the game in a positive way, and it took him a while.
And you mentioned it's a dark time, obviously, with losing so many games in a row and trying to pick yourself back up. I just know with Iowa playing at Iowa this week, obviously Patrick McCaffrey took some time away from basketball this year, mental health reasons. How much is that addressed right now within the program, just getting guys right mentally, not only for this season, but for their careers?
I think it's something to be mindful of, and I think we as coaches have to be mindful of it with our guys. They're our responsibility, and their mental health is their responsibility, but it's also our responsibility. And it's our responsibility to have an awareness and an openness to kind of reading where they're at in a given moment. So, as I mentioned way back when Patrick made that public statement, I think it took a lot of courage on his part because there can still be stigma around athletes when it comes to mental health. So I think it did take real courage on his part just to be honest about some of his struggles with anxiety. And I give him and his family a ton of credit and his teammates a ton of credit for kind of rallying around him and giving him the support he needs. Patrick knows that he's not the only one that is struggling with that, and there's a lot of people that are rooting and pulling for him, but he also helped a lot of athletes who struggle with anxiety, and the struggle can be very real for him. And there's no question that he helped a lot of athletes in that regard.
Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but on the radio show, you said you weren't coming back between the two road
We're
games
not.
this week.
Yeah, we're not. Yeah,
what are kind of the logistical challenges with that? How does the day-to-day look when you're kind of approaching a week like this?
Yeah, good question. I believe we're staying overnight, I believe, in Iowa City, I think, because of this late tip. Get plenty of sleep. We'll leave probably mid-morning the next day. So sleep's the main reason. Sleep and rest is the main reason. On Friday we'll do study table with our guys, an academic study table for an hour or two, and then we'll practice there in West Lafayette on Friday and Saturday.
You mentioned on your radio show something about maybe adding a shooter who hasn't played much to the lineup as you're trying to space things a little bit.
It's just one of the ideas, Adam, I'm kind of thinking through, and we're looking at as a staff, do we need to? I don't know if that's a direction we'll go or not.
Okay. And also just looking at Iowa then compared to Iowa now, I know it's, like you said, it's Monday. You haven't dug too much into them yet, but just in general, how different could this game look? Could they look? How much do teams change over the course of the season? And how different are teams? Do you think teams will play against you, having seen you the first time?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I've not dove into them as much since. I just think they're very good at home. They're very good at home, and they're a good team, but they're very good at home. Always a great crowd, energized crowd. So they've got really good players. We played very well here. Played very well offensively and played well defensively too. They're just a really good rebounding team. They're very good they're very good in transition. They're a very good executing team offensively, and their changing defenses can bother you for sure.